So why does getting stricter feel more productive? Hi, and welcome back to Not Here to Fix You, the podcast where we talk about food behavior, emotions, healing, and everything in between. I'm your co-host, Amanda, a food behavior stability strategist. I help high functioning women to be consistent with their eating patterns, especially under stress. And with me today is my other co-host, Rosina, an emotional repair language coach.
Yes, that's me. I am your repair language companion or coach. I really prefer the word companion because for me, it's alongside the journey. And for me, is repair language. The relationship repair language is learning how to translate reactions into needs. So instead of seeing someone as reactive, you can see what they need in the moment that they didn't receive. So yeah, I'm excited to be here. Episode whatever.
Yeah, and we're here to not fix you, but just to talk to you. So let's talk about why tightening isn't stability. And I think I'm going to approach this from the food perspective, but I just want to say that um, tightening does feel productive to me, at least, not with food, but at least with my to-do list. Because every time I write one, I feel so excited because I feel so productive. Whether I accomplish it is a different story, but jokes aside, when it comes to food, I generally talk about the spiral and the night out because that's what Lazina and I are like. That used to be our type, our pattern. That used to be our pattern. But I don't want the ones who are the soldiers and the pendulums out there to feel left out. So I'm going to address those patterns today. I think I want to stay with respect to the pendulum. I feel like for them, their identity is between two extremes, pretty much. Like that, it's an all or nothing kind of pattern, basically. So they're either very disciplined and very strict about their eating and their food habits and their whatever related to food, or they are like, screw this. I'm just gonna do what I want to do because it's too much of control. It's too much of performance, and I can't quite do that. And with the soldier, I think control is kind of their identity, but more from the place of safety because being in control is what has gotten them uh, through tough situations and through life in general. They feel like if they make a plan and they stick within the confines of that plan, that's when everything works out for them. So I think what happens is when you push these eating behaviors to the max, and by that I mean it's rigid discipline, eventually that's not helping you because you do need some sort of flexibility. And that I think over discipline does lead to you getting a bit tired and slipping up every once in a while. And then based on what pattern you are, there are negative consequences because uh, for the soldier, it's like one little slip up and they can't control it anymore. They go into overeating and like everything that they said they're not gonna do, they do. So it's no longer I'm gonna eat a little bit and I'm gonna be happy with that. It's I'm gonna go all out and eat everything. And the same for the pendulum. It's for them every time they restart, they feel like okay, I'm being productive by restarting, but there's no actual consistency because they restart, they stop, they restart, they stop, and then that's the cycle they are just generally pushed into. But okay, let's address the night out. So, do you feel like that's something you experienced? Because that was your pattern, Latina.
I was thinking about what you were saying that, why tightening feels productive. And the way that you were describing the pendulum, for example, from one extreme to the other. And I think that's relatable in so many ways because there are times when on the journey of self-discovery or I need to do something different, we have these rules that we have to stick by. And we have these ways that, like to build discipline, we have to commit to a certain types of behavior. But while we are committing to those types of behavior for, let's say, 21 days, for example, what our resistances naturally are going to come up. And that's what we need. That's what I needed to face in those moments when I'm pushing myself to have this discipline. It's because I didn't have it in the first place. So now that I'm okay, I'm being rigid or I'm like, okay, I'm following this line, it does feel productive because now I'm like actively training myself to do it differently. And I think after a while, if I don't really take a look and see what my emotional needs are when the resistances come up and explore that part of it, that's when it can be easy to slip off or to feel or to shame myself that I'm not doing this, I'm not staying on task, I'm not continuing my progress. So that's kind of what came up for me while you were sharing about the pendulum. And yeah, night out. I just think back about how, I mean, in some ways, even though I'm conscious of it, I'm like, okay, I'm consciously eating now. It's at night. What am I eating for? So it's like a little switch in my mind. Like, is this doing it the right way? Okay, what am I honoring right now? Am I honoring an emotional avoidance, an emotional need? Am I really taking care of myself, or am I doing something that I'm going to regret in the morning? So it's like it became easy to ask those questions in the moment now when before I didn't have any clue what those questions were. So I don't know that I answered your question in the way that you asked, but that's what kind of came up for me in the moment.
No, but that makes sense. It did make and I'm glad you went like you touched back on the pendulum because for a minute I was like, I don't know whether I'm making, but yeah. But so yeah, with the pendulum, does I think what you said right because I think when we do start, we go in with this intensity. Okay, like now I'm gonna like try and get it right. Especially for me, because I used to be a spider. That's what I wanted. I wanted to do it better. I wanted to do it right. So there is this tendency when you first start out on a new journey, especially when you want to change something you want to do your best from the beginning. But then I think sometimes we sort of overcompensate in some ways because we're not just trying our best, we're overdoing it. We're not like, okay, this is my, because we nitpick. Then we're like, oh, did I, like, I feel like I did my best, but did I really do my best? Was this really enough? And then all these questions come up. So I think that's when the step up comes because while you were saying that, it reminded me that it comes back to not feeling good enough, like we're not doing enough or like something like that. And then we have this negative self-talk, whether this voice in our head is from our younger selves or, somebody else in our lives at one point. And we're like hearing the voices like, oh, like, this isn't enough. You need to do more. Or if you made a mistake while you started, like, you made a mistake, like you're not doing this correctly. And, that little back and forth. So what do you feel about that? What do you think in those moments do you think we need emotionally, like to regulate ourselves, like just to come back?
Well, I think it depends on the person because every single one of us is going to have our own experience. So sometimes when I speak and I give example, I like to speak from the I, which is me because you when using you language can feel harsh on the nervous system. So I'm thinking about if I'm listening to a podcast and someone is sharing information and they're saying and they're giving an example to me, how am I receiving that? So with that in mind, I like to do this thing that's reflective mirroring, like mirroring conversation. So it what essentially means to me is that when I'm sharing something about myself, reflect onto that and how you show up in it. So again, in this kind of conversation when it has to do with emotional needs, I'm going to share how I respond and what I've seen in other people. But that doesn't mean that it's an analysis or a definition of every single person. So this is where it gets really interesting because every single one of us have our own unique emotional needs. And what's going to be true for me is going to be completely the opposite for someone else. But they're going to have another way. So when it comes to emotional needs, it can go so deep. It can go deep into this is complete self abandonment, or I needed support and I didn't know how to ask for it. And so let's say somebody is a pendulum and they go from one extreme to the other. The one extreme that they go to is they're heart centered, they are in alignment, they are normal, they're in integrity, they like to show up for others and themselves. But then there's these occasions when they're like completely a mess. Now gosh, I don't even want to say that it's okay to be a mess, where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not proud of myself today, I don't know what the heck I did, how could I have even gone this far? And so it's that compassionate piece that's needed. First of all, I would say I would need compassion when and I've gone to the other side. And once I have to receive compassion too. So it's important for me to give myself compassion and not look for that from other people. Because if I'm already shaming myself and I'm telling somebody this is what I'm doing, people have the tendency to give advice. That's not going to help me come back to center so that I know what I'm feeling or what I even need. So it's important for us to have like a breakdown of our emotional needs, our core emotional needs. Knowing what that is offhand is already important. Like my core emotional need to feel seen, to feel belong, to feel encouraged, to feel supported. And when those aren't being met, they can mean that I'm not good enough, you don't love me, I'm always going to be alone, I can never ask anybody for help. Those are like really key emotional needs, but how do they show up in behaviors? How do they show up in language? How nobody we don't have the words to say, "Hey Amanda, I'm really struggling today and I just don't know what it is. Can we sit down and break down what I'm feeling?" Or what I might be experiencing. The initial resistance to that is that Amanda's going to judge me. Amanda's going to give me advice. Amanda's not really going to see and really understand what I'm going through. So I'm going to already be resistant to whatever I'm going to be ingesting. So it really takes somebody really knowing themselves or taking the time to learn what they didn't know and being open and curious to that process to even understand what their emotional needs is. Because it could be something simple as like I had a point at work and I had a great idea and I felt shut down. And whenever I felt shut down, that's now triggered inside of me a moment when I was trying to share something with my parents and they were too busy or whatever the case is and weren't emotionally available to acknowledge what that experience was. And that's what showed up in that moment. And now I can do a total repair with myself, or I can reach out to somebody and say, hey, man, this is what happened to me today. And just being able to have a way to offset that or journaling, whatever is that person's thing. Because even for me, I didn't like journaling. So journaling was something that was a habit that I had to discover for myself. So you see what I mean? It can go into like a lot of rabbit holes. So it's really essential for someone to really know what their emotional needs are so that they could try to meet it while they're repairing different aspects of awareness pieces. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. And I like how you shared about the shame that comes up, like especially when you said that, like the shame and guilt. Like especially for the pendulum, I feel like their shame is rooted more in the fact that they don't have any consistency because um, like I've seen the pattern goes from, like I said, one extreme to the other. But then I like that you said, like, you need to look at the emotional needs that they're missing out on, because this actually happened to a client who used to be a pendulum and she was on two extremes. And then I would ask her, like, what's going on, with, life in general. Like, I just wanted to know because I knew there was something rooted in that. And then she would share that she was stressed out about, work or family or something. So I realized that she was dysregulated. That's my observation as someone who is helping her. So, and yeah, you're right. You don't want someone to immediately sit down and judge you and point out things. So I would try and walk her through it and see if she was getting that awareness herself. But then I would need to knock on those, touch on those aspects and say, hey, what about this? And what about that? And then eventually she was come to the realization that she was quite okay with food, but then when she had these things come up, they were throwing her for a loop. And in her particular situation, she felt like she needed to play uh, like from what I observed, I felt like she wanted to play the mediator role in her family. Like she would be I'm in the middle and then I need to like have people on either side work it out. And I don't know whether she gave herself that role or whether that's a role that she grew up with and, then you kind of assign that role to yourself. But it was interesting because at least I noticed that from the emotional side of like the aspect of her that then she could have used you with the emotional aspect. But that's what I'm trying to say. I think uh the shame comes in because there's a lack of consistency. So I think what they really need is more stability. And I feel that only comes from being able to kind of regulate yourself better. So what advice would you give to someone like her, like with regards to emotional regulation based
Well,
on what
when
you
so you said something pretty interesting that I also would tie this into. You said someone who doesn't have consistency tend to fall off their path. not the path, but like the plan or whatever focus they want to have. And so when it comes to why I don't have consistency in the first place, right? That is where I would go deeper. Like, what experiences have I had that I just didn't develop consistency? Who is it that because normally if I don't have consistency, it's because I'm internally punishing someone else for not showing up for me. So why should I? It's a little bit of revenge, underhanded, unconscious revenge. And I don't know that that's how I'm sabotaging. And consistency is something that we're supposed to be taught and we never had language for. So a lot of this, and a part of the reason why we are so focused on not here to fix you is because most of these things that we have learned is not, we just never had the language for it. So when we're going into something now and it's like, okay, I lack consistency. Well, why do I lack consistency in the first place? There's so much there because someone can be very productive at work. And then when they're home, they're so tired because they're not living in their purpose. They're not living from fulfillment. Everything feels daunting. So I'm not going to want to go do an activity that I know is healthy for me because I'm emotionally tired. I'm emotionally drained. I've given to other people so much and I want to be felt. I want to be heard. I want to be understood. But none of that has words. It just shows up in lack of consistency. And we tend to make a behavior an emotion. We tend to make a behavior an identity, a behavior a judgment. And so I would say to her, get curious about the shame, get curious about the consistency, because shame is something that really hates its name. Once you bring it into the front, and even if you write it down, I am ashamed of how I'm behaving right now, that already is a path to changing a behavior. That is already a path to change, to having more of an awareness piece in there. So I always like to say, when shame or resistance or lack of consistency, any of those things are coming up where I feel like, man, I'm not doing what I should be doing, or I could have done this better. That's the moment to say, let me go and observe now. I can feel it. And this is something that I want to give some clarity around, right? Because often we have this idea of, okay, we have to heal or we have to do this work and we have to do this. But what does that actually look like? Well, that looks like maybe calling a friend, safer wise, because not everybody can meet us where we want. And so let's say I call a friend and that friend is giving me that advice, I'm going to start to get resistant and pull back. So the best thing that I can do is write it down. Put, like, literally go pen and paper and write down exactly what it is that I'm feeling. I am feeling ashamed. Be raw with it. Be honest with it. Let it flow, because it's only then we're going to be able to get to the underneath. So all of the thoughts, do a brain dump, just get everything out. And this is like the most common advice you'll get anywhere, but the reason behind of it is what's really important. It's because now you're giving yourself an experiential way of letting all that thoughts out. So now you can, okay, once you're done, this is how I felt. I was ashamed of my behavior because when I was younger, whenever I did something that wasn't in integrity or expected of me, I was shamed for it. I didn't experience what unconditional love is. I didn't experience a language of giving grace and compassion and understanding that I can mess up. And in messing up is how I learn. And this is the tools that I'm now going to pick up. So it's like literally a repairing moment within ourselves to get to those answers. So it's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you're talking to somebody who is reinforcing shame, or better, or here's how you can do it differently, and not being more of a reflective, when I say reflective listener, not like what I'm hearing you say, it's more like, oh, what I'm understanding, this is how it showed up in me in more of a relatable way, that is what offers the opportunity to really explore. So if you don't have those kinds of people in your life, that's what Amanda and I are here for. But other than that, you have, you got to journal, even if it's one of the most challenging things is record yourself talking about it. Because once you record yourself talking about it, it's going to be cringy, but it's also going to be like, wow, that is not how I feel about myself. That is not the person that I want to be. That is not who I am. And then that now will be the reinforcer for the next time it comes up, because then now you're operating from new information, a new belief system, a new strength, so to speak.
Yeah. And I love that you said that because when you were talking about the journaling part, like I remember when you gave me that exercise, not for this particular situation, but it was something else. And I remember that I had to like literally, you were like, get a pen and paper and do it. And I did. But like I have this habit where I can just do it in my head as well. So I'll take the end game and then I'll work backwards. But it was interesting to see all the things that come up because you literally pull all the pieces, like you said, like or this is what came up at that age, and like this is why I said this at that time. And then you can, it's like like yours is the emotional journal. And like I know when I tell my clients to journal, it's mostly about food and what happened before and after. But I feel like if you put those two together, that can really paint like a good picture for you, like both with the emotional regulation and with the behavior around food. And I think journaling also does help you to slow it down. So that just doing that in itself, I feel like there is a calmness to it because you are no longer like rushing and, being in your head. You literally have to sit and be present and look back at things. So you're not like trying to like um push forward. You're actually like taking a moment to sit there and like collect yourself and think about it. So I think that's very
Yeah.
neat. That's a great tip. That's great advice.
And to add to what we're saying here too, when it comes to journaling, right? When like you were saying that sometimes you keep it in your head, and that's what I used to do too. But what I didn't know was that our brains are wired to repeat, to get on that loop. And so when we are in our head, it's just replaying the same thing over and over, and then other things are going to become reinforced. So let me look at this other evidence. But when I'm taking what's in my head and writing it down on paper, I don't have somebody else talking to me. When I say somebody has another thought coming in to reinforce that, I'm just getting all of the thoughts out. I'm putting that down, and it's very important to give ourselves those experiences where our body can also be in coherence and in connection, because ultimately we need to go into our feelings. Our feelings are the driving force. There's this saying that our thoughts create our reality. Well, that's true, but we can't just go and change our thoughts. There's emotional aspects that's attached to those thoughts. And when we don't give ourselves a chance to like really alchemize that and purify it, it's going to constantly come back up. And it's a thing because our heart is saying this is our desire, and our thoughts are saying this is who we want to be. But then our actions are not supporting that, because if I really want to be in relationship with somebody and that's my heart's desire, but my thoughts are saying, well, what if they abandon me? What action am I going to take in that moment? Even if I take the action to like chase after them, right? I am still doing something that is self-abandoning me, because
Yeah.
my logic and my heart is just not together, and I'm not in emotional integrity in those moments. So it's like a process, because at the end of the day, once our thoughts and our heart is in alignment, then we move with that extra belief system and motivation and all the things that we need to thrive. They come naturally. Our brain is starting to be like, oh, this is not good for me anymore, I don't want that, instead of like, oh, this is not good for me, and here's all the way this is not good for me, and then going backwards into the repetitive states. I just want to say again, this is because I've learned this, and I've been somebody who just do not want to write or anything. Oh, I really had a thought, and I want to share this. One of the beautiful processes too about this putting it down together, everybody has a unique talent, right? And sometimes people like to paint or write poetry, or I don't know, whatever it is that they are creative in. That's a great way to channel these kinds of thoughts too, because if I'm an artist and my thoughts are saying all of these things, right? And I'm like, okay, well, let me create the picture of what my thoughts are saying. That I think is that is such a beautiful way of like inner connection, because it's really truly honing into like who you are and how you're doing this. And those poetries or writings or art or whatever, they can end up becoming like things that you share with other people. Because isn't that like what music is for? Like I think most teenagers relate to like the heavy metal, the angry music, because that's how they're feeling, and that's how somebody was feeling, and they put it into words, and it helped give a name and an experience for someone else to be jamming out in their car. But like, So, anyways, that's my addition there. Please take it back.
No, but I agree. And like you've convinced me to like write it out. I think like I just need to get myself more Like, I need to stop being lazy. And I think I need to make this habit where, because I know you're always with a book and a paper around you somewhere. So I need to get a book and a pen. Like, I have pens. I just feel like I don't have books. So I need to get books and like get writing. But I was laughing a little because what you shared about like writing it down for art, like that makes total sense. Like I was talking to someone else the other day and they were like, oh, I just had this thought in my head. And then I just whipped out my phone and like I said everything like I was in my head onto my phone. And I was like, later on, I'm going to take it and then I'm going to turn it into this idea for something. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. And they were giving me like tips because I literally did this the other day and I was thinking of you, Ladina, because I was going through this, like something came up for me emotionally, and I was like, you know what? Like, I think I need to get it out. But like, you already know that my favorite way to get it out is like when I write. So I wrote a whole poem on it, and I was like, I'll show you later. But it was so cool, and I was like, I got it all out, and I was like, oh, okay. Like, I feel so much better now. Like, it's not that the feeling attached to the emotion disappears, but it's so much lighter when you get it out. And
Hmm.
like Lazina said, you get a cool piece of art to go with it. So like, why the hell not?
And
So I
clarity,
agree.
because the release is so good too.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is good. I love
Yeah.
that. All right. Are there the last thing that we really need to address is the intensity that with which we go through our new journeys, whether it's emotional or with food. Is that really safety? Is there safety in the intensity? It's pretty much the question.
I think there's a level of intensity that's needed to get us started, right? To get us going. Because when it comes to any kind of work, whether it's any kind of internal work, or even like if somebody's going to the gym or they're taking on a new project, right? You have to be diligent because this is something new. This is, I got to get going. I got to go and do this. And then that intensity turns into excitement for me because now it's like, wow, look at all of this thing that it becomes a mindset shift at that point. So after like a bunch of intensity, then it's like, oh my gosh, I just want to keep going because I understand that this is something that's rewarding and I must continue. And then towards the end of it, it becomes more softer and it's like, okay, I don't have to do that anymore. I'm now integrated. So I think intensity is needed into the integration part, and then we need to be able to pay attention to what our thoughts and our feelings are too, because sometimes it's just calling for us to actually slow down and be. Because insight, we talked about this, insight alone is not going to be the only thing that helps us. We have to also integrate. And that integration period requires messing up and learning. It requires, how am I showing up for other people? How am I showing up for myself? And we can't have that in our head. And because again, we have this idea of who we want to be. But when we are in conversation or we're faced with that moment of like, am I going to eat this? What are my emotional needs right now? We have to pause to really understand what that experience is like. And I like to call that experiencing the experience. So all of it is intense, but on the journey of intensity, it's like, I got to get there. I'm going to be late. And then every time you see you're proving to yourself now, like, no, I made it on time. Look, I made it on time. It's a way of showing up for your own self to say, all right, I got this now. So it's like, okay, I've been like crazy about leaving 5 minutes before work because I wanted to get there on time. Well, now I know that I can leave 5 minutes before work. I don't have to be like, oh my God, I gotta leave 5 minutes from work. Like, all right, I'm leaving 5 minutes from work. And then it's like, wow, I left 5 minutes from work and nothing happened. I trust that self trust starts to build, right? And then now it's like, you know what? Maybe I can leave 3 minutes for work now. Like, it's okay. Let me just enjoy this. Let's see what happens on the road. And it just becomes an adventure for me at that point because I really have found like there's so many ways that I beat myself up. And that was the time, that's what I needed at the time. It wasn't necessarily the right thing, but it was what I needed. And I needed to come out of that. So when I'm done beating myself up, I also don't want someone else to beat me up. Right. So then I'm going to be resistant to that. And I also have to be open to like, okay, someone else is going to beat me up and I don't have to take that personally. And so it's like building muscles and building up the strength to be like, okay, not everything is that bad. And I can do this. I have all the tools and I'm going to practice them all. But this all has to, you have to come with guidance. At first, like, for example, you have to know what your eating patterns are. So many of us go around like, wondering like, do I have trauma? I don't have trauma. Trauma is for other people. There's big T's and there's little T's, right? But it's all an experience to have because we just don't know what we don't know. So most of the times when it's time to do something differently, that shame, oh, it'll come right in. So my goal is like, let's replace shame with curiosity. We're not removing shame. We can't get rid of our feelings. That's a beautiful thing. None of us are going to be able, these feelings are part of our humanness and they're big, big messengers. So anger teaches us what we're passionate about. So how can we get rid of anger? We just have to alchemize the negative parts of it to, to get better. So bring in curiosity then. Why am I feeling this way? Why am I doing this? Why am I hurting myself? Am I hurting myself? Because sometimes I talk to people, right? And I will say, from what I've learned, 0 to 3 is when we learn our emotional safety and our nervous system learns regulation. So, what were your experiences at 3? Did you have a word for that? Did you have a language? And most people are so quick to bypass that and jump over it instead of taking a moment to reflect, like, wait, was my emotional needs met then? What was happening in that moment? Because nobody wants to go back to that. And again, shame. Shame because I don't want to talk about my parents. Shame, I don't want to acknowledge that moment where they did not that they are bad people. Like, you don't have to go defend them. I know who they are. I know how they show up for me. But in the moment, what was it that I needed that I didn't get? And how does my relationship with food show up? How does it show up in my relationship with other people, myself? So these are all things we just never had language for, and we get to do it curiously.
Yeah. And like just to add to what you said, because like you said a lot of things which made a lot of sense. We've covered this even without a podcast, but I wanted to add that I think when it comes to intensity, like out of from my experience, when I start something new, it's like always exciting, right? Because there's like this freshness to it, this newness. There's this version of me that when I sit now and I think back to it, like I used to like this saying when I was younger. It's like go hard or go home. And for years I would be like, yes, go hard or go home. So like you eat like my intensity would be like at 100 because I was like, there was shame in just going home. It's like I have to give it. I have to give it my best. I have to do this. But then I realized as I got older, I was like, I'm putting so much emphasis on the have to, and that's causing guilt and that's causing stress and that's causing shame when I'm not meeting my own expectations because I'm putting myself on this pedestal and then I'm like, I'm not achieving it. And then I learned this all through working with you too. But I think now what I really look for is kind of more balance. Like, there was a point when I remember I was scrolling through social media and there was this post that someone said, they say go hard or go home. But like, what's wrong with going home? I love going home. It's like fantastic. It's comfortable. Like you can just put on your PJs and chill. And I was like, that kind of makes sense. Like, why have I been trying to go hard for so long? So now I'm like, you know what? You can't, I'm not fully over the going hard, but I do want to have balance. So now I just go at it with less intensity and I am comfortable with the softness of like just being home. So if there's anyone out there like me who believes in the go hard policy, and who wants to kind of like be a little bit more in the middle, I would say, like definitely have that excitement towards your journey, but then remember that you're human. Let's just say you set out 5 things for yourself. Maybe if you don't accomplish all 5, it isn't the end of the world. If I can get 3 done, I'll have good all of the progress. I will game myself because I know 5 things I will be. So I feel like for me, I kind of look at my like what's good over what's bad, and then I think that's where I feel like you can be intense, but you can be intense with the softness. So you don't have to like put this pressure on yourself and then feel like you're the only one who's burdening yourself with all of this and you're about to cry. So I think it's just yeah. What I'm advocating for right now is balance by all means, whether you're starting your journey with emotional self awareness, or whether it's just looking at your eating patterns, I think the fact that you guys are just trying your best to take one step forward, I feel like that's good enough. And like as much as you celebrate the wins, you need to also look at the areas where you're stepping up, not because you want to shame yourself, but just because you realize, like, okay, you can always look at, oh, this is how far I've come with my progress, but now, like, yeah, I just have a few more things to get better with. Like, if you phrase it that way, I feel like you don't feel like, you're either not accomplishing what you want or you're being too complacent with what you want to achieve. Yeah, I think I pretty much summed up everything that I had to say. Do you have any closing thoughts, Rosina, before we land the plane?
So, what I would like to add to that is that there there are ways that you'll notice a coach or a therapist will talk to you, and that typically is they're asking these questions. And I know for me personally, when they were asking me questions, it just made me more confused because I was like, "What are you trying to say?" But what I've realized is that they were trying to get me to name what it is that I was feeling and what I was experiencing. And I didn't have the words for it and I didn't know how to name it. So, the power of naming how we're feeling or what our experiences are is part of the big transformation that we can have within ourselves. And that is why, Amanda, you have your quiz. That's why I have my quiz, because these quizzes are not labels, they're not another assessment. They're just a way for you to name what you need so that you can understand it better and start doing it differently. So your quiz, for example, is going to give someone great insight into their eating pattern, and my quiz is going to give someone insight into what their emotional needs are. Try it out. Take the test, see what it looks like. Be curious, like learn more. Go on an exploration with it, you know? And so that's part of the reason why, we have this podcast. So we're here to be your guide, your companion, just alongside the journey with you because we're not here to fix you. So if this episode resonates with you or it made you think of somebody that you've had this very conversation with, share it with them. Let's check out the show notes, go deeper, go to our quizzes and, just explore and join our conversation, comment, reach out to us and see how we can be of support to you as well or the people that you love and care about. So until next time, again, you really are not broken, just don't have the language for it. So thank you for listening.
Hi, guys.